morning and welcome to Westside Presbyterian Church in Cambridge. My name is Mike Wasyluk. I work for the Presbytery of Waterloo, Wellington, and I'll be leading worship this morning in place of Reverend Mark, who is on vacation. I hope wherever you are this morning that you're having a great morning and that you'll be blessed by our service here together. We've got a few announcements this morning for you, so let's dig into those.
Okay. Hello, Westside friends and family. We're here at our curbside meat pie sale, and as you can see, our cupboard is bare. We had a successful day. We sold 207 meat pies, and it was just great to see everybody. And the weathermen cooperated. We've got beautiful sunshine, so we hope you enjoy your pies. And we're just going to keep rolling.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be back in September.
On Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., there will be a Bible study hosted by Reverend Mark. That will be on the phone, so if you want to call in and take part in that, that would be great. And on Wednesday at 2:10, there will be a coffee time on Zoom. Both of those are hosted by Mark, and if you want any more information on those, make sure that you contact the church office or Reverend Mark. The session meets via Zoom this Tuesday night at 6:50, just in case you forgot, and I'll be there for that as well as we go through another book together. And at the end of the video this morning, there will be a YouTube subscription tutorial led by Tara and some information on the Getty Sing-Along. So before we dive into the rest of our service, let's just pray together this morning. God, thank you for today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to come together and to worship and to learn. And God, even though we are apart, I pray that you would bring our hearts and our minds and our spirits together this morning as we focus on you and try to hear the things that you are teaching us in our lives. Amen.
For the healing of the nations, Lord, we pray with one accord. For a just and equal sharing of the things that earth affords, to a life of love in action, help us rise and pledge our word. All that kills abundant living, let it from the earth be banned. Light of status, race, or schooling, dogmas that obscure your plan. In our common quest for justice, may we hallow life's brief span. You, Creator God, have written your great name on humankind. For our growing in your likeness, bring the life of Christ to mind, that by our response and service, earth its destiny may find.
Well, who would have thought a few months ago when Mark and I were talking about me coming back to Westside to speak that I would be doing it into a camera instead of in person. But whether we're here or we're in person, I'm really happy to get the opportunity to spend some time with you guys again. Last time when I was here, I had a great time talking about some generational gaps and differences and some cultural topics. But after the sermon, a handful of people came up to me and kept asking this question. Mike, it's great that we've learned this stuff about emerging generations and about generational differences, but honestly, what's next? What's the next thing that we need to do? What's the next thing that we need to know? How does this all work together? So this morning, we are going to talk about this question of what is next. But before we do that, just in case you're newer to church or this is your first Sunday, I just want to catch you up and make sure you're hanging out with us here. So we're reading from our Bibles this morning. In Greek, the Bible is translated to Biblia, which just means a collection of books or the book of books. Each Bible is separated into two sections, your Old Testament and your New Testament. Testament means promise or covenant. So the Old Promise, the Old Testament, is about a promise that God makes to a guy named Abraham that he will send a Savior to come and liberate the Jewish people, and that person ends up being Jesus. So that promise is fulfilled, which is why we call it the Old Testament or the Old Promise. The New Testament is where Jesus promises that he's going to heaven to prepare a place for us and his people, and then he's going to come back and bring us there too. That's the new promise. We call it the new promise because we're still waiting for fulfillment on that because, here we are. So this morning we're going to read out of one of the books in the Bible. We're going to read out of the book of Acts. It's in the New Testament, the 5th book, and it's about some things that happened just after Jesus left the earth. It was written just a few years after his death. And it was written by this guy named Luke, who was a historian and a doctor and was going around gathering as much information as he could to write down for a friend of his that had asked him to do so. Now, last time we were together, we talked about this story called the Jerusalem Council. And here's what happened. The Gentiles, which we remember are people who aren't Jewish, their culture was different, their practices were different, their religion was different. The Gentiles were starting to get to know Jesus, but they were struggling with Jewish culture. And last time we were together, we talked about some of the cultural differences between ages in our culture today, right? So builders and Gen Xers and boomers culturally have a lot of differences between millennials and Gen Zers. And that's kind of what's going on here. The Gentile culture is much different than the Jewish culture, but they're still trying to figure out how to follow Jesus. So we remember that the big issue here that we read about was circumcision, right? This was the big barrier, the big hurdle. They said, we'd really love to get to know Jesus, but we think that circumcision is really a barrier to us getting to know him. So Paul and Barnabas get together and they go to Jerusalem to meet with the elders and the teachers to try to find a solution to this problem. And after a big debate around the board table for a long time, James gets up and declares we really shouldn't make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. And then we talked a little bit about some generational differences and gaps, but that's kind of where we left the story. We left ourselves in Acts where they just made a decision, but they didn't do anything yet. And so that's, I think, why so many people ask the question, what is next? So today we're going to dive right back into that story. We're going to pick up in Acts exactly where we left off, and we're going to finish out and we're going to see what the early church did to help the Gentiles and make it not as difficult to follow Jesus. Now, in case you're going to have trouble following along this morning, I'm going to give you the bottom line right now. So if you want to fast forward to the end of the service and jump right back to Cheryl, you can do that because this is the thing that I want you to take away no matter what. The message you're sending isn't true unless you actually follow through. Say that with me at your house. The message you're sending isn't true unless you actually follow through. Now, this is a pretty simple concept, and I don't think it needs too much explanation, but I'll give you one example. If you have a kid and you say, can you go clean your room? And your kid says, yes, I'm absolutely going to go clean my room. And then they spend all day and they don't clean their room. Then even though they said to you, we believe we need to clean our room, we're going to clean our room. Because they didn't do it, it didn't really mean that much. It didn't come true. The thing that they said didn't come to pass, and therefore the message that they sent, I'm going to clean my room, wasn't true because they didn't follow through. And in this context for our story today, we know that they made this decision at the Jerusalem Council that they needed to find ways to help the Gentiles be able to follow Jesus easier. But if that's where they had left the decision, if they had just said, okay, now we've made this decision, if there was no follow through, then the decision would have been pretty empty. The message they would have been sending wouldn't have been true because they didn't follow through. So as we continue on this morning, I just want you to have that in the back of your mind. Here we go. Let's dig into Acts chapter 15, 22. Then the apostles and the elders, with the consent of the whole church, decided to choose men from among their members and then send them to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. They sent Judas, not that Judas, and Silas, leaders among the brothers in the church, with the following letter. So here's what's going on. The council is now over. They made that decision. James made that declaration. We shouldn't make it difficult to follow Jesus. So they've decided, as an action step, they're going to draft this letter. And they're going to send this letter back to the Gentiles with Paul and Barnabas. We're going to read the letter in a second. But it's really important that it says they're not going alone. They're going to send Judas and Silas along with Paul and Barnabas. We're going to talk about why that's important in a second too. So let's get into the letter. Here's how the letter starts. To the believers of Gentile origin in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that certain persons who have gone out from us, though with no instructions from us, have said things to disturb you and have unsettled your mind. So we remember the certain persons from the last time we talked. Those were people that were telling the Gentiles they needed to follow all of the Jewish rules and Jewish traditions and Jewish customs in order to follow Jesus. And what they're saying here is, remember those guys that told you that circumcision was a requirement to following Jesus? Well, we just want to clarify that didn't come from us. That didn't come from us, and we know it's causing a problem, and we're really sorry, and we're going to try to fix it with this letter right now. The letter continues. We have decided unanimously to choose representatives and send them to you along with our beloved Barnabas and Paul. We have therefore sent Judas and Silas, from whom themselves will tell you the same things by word of mouth. So, what they're saying is, we wrote this letter, we all came up with it together. It was unanimous. There's no question that what you're about to read is what we believe and the instructions that we really truly believe that we need to give you. And to show you how serious we are, we didn't just write a letter. And we didn't just give it to Paul and Barnabas, who are your guys. We're sending some of our guys too, because we know that it's important that you see more than just Paul and Barnabas, that you see that the whole church is behind you, the Gentiles, in your quest to follow and get to know Jesus. And that's really impactful, because I can tell you as a youth pastor, I can do as much as I can, and my youth leaders can do a lot as well. But when somebody else from our church comes into one of the youth in my youth group's lives and intentionally makes an impact, it shows them not only that they matter, but it shows them that the rest of the church is thinking about them too. And that's exactly what happens here. Let's continue on. For it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us, for it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to impose on you no further burden than these essentials. And when it says no further burden, we remember that in Jewish law, there was 613 different rules that they needed to follow to be in line with Jewish law and Jewish customs. And the Gentiles were really struggling with this. So what they're saying is, we're just going to tell you these essential things. Verse 29, that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. If you keep yourselves to these, you will do well. And then the letter ends. Farewell. So here's what happened. They say, we believe that we've heard God's voice on this, and we have found unity on this, and we don't want to impress upon you a bunch of things that don't matter. But we think these three things are essential for you to be able to follow Jesus better. And here's the three things. Abstain from food sacrificed to idols, blood of strangled animals, and sexual immorality and fornication. And what is the common thread between these three things? Anybody? If we were in person, I'd call somebody out. But because we're here, I'll just give it away. The common thread is paganism. Now, if the Gentiles are people that aren't Jewish, right? For the sake of this conversation, let's describe paganism as the religious practices or the religious traditions or the religious culture or experience of the Gentiles, right? So the Jews had their laws, and the Gentiles were pagans. They followed these different religious practices. And one of the biggest differences is that as Christians and the Jews, we are monotheistic. That means we believe in one God. But the pagans believed in multiple gods. They were polytheistic. So there were all kinds of different idols to all kinds of different gods all over the place. And they would pray to these multiple gods depending on what they needed and what their desire was in that moment. And they would sacrifice animals or whatever they were sacrificing to each of these idols and gods. And this caused an interesting problem that the Jewish leaders were trying to solve. Because what the Jewish leaders here aren't trying to do is say, you can't do these three things because they're part of our tradition. They're saying these three things will actually help draw you closer to Jesus. And here's how. If you stop eating the food sacrificed to idols, that will take you out of the religious practices of paganism and draw you towards the monotheistic, the Jesus-centered view of the world. Same with blood of strangled animals. It was a pagan delicacy, but not something that was culturally acceptable or used when following Jesus or in Jewish culture. And they said, if you were to do this, it'll actually set you apart. And same with sexual immorality. Prostitution was very popular in a lot of pagan temples. And so actually, by asking them to do these three things, they weren't trying to control their lives. They weren't trying to get them to hold to certain traditions for tradition's sake. What they were trying to do is they were trying to separate the Gentiles from paganism and draw them closer to Jesus. And I think you would all agree that if all of a sudden you stopped doing some of these religious practices that pagans were doing and instead started worshiping Jesus, others would notice as well. So here's the big takeaway from this, right? Removing the need for circumcision, the traditions, the religious practices of Jews, eliminated the barrier between the Gentile church and the Jewish church, or more importantly, the Gentile church and Jesus. Remember, that's how all this started. The Gentiles wanted to get closer to Jesus, but tradition and religion was the barrier. So the Jewish church said, okay, we're going to get rid of that. And these three requirements that we just went over, they actually strengthen the barrier between the Gentile church and paganism. They strengthen the barrier between their old ways and their new ways. These three things weren't here as traditions that were pointless or things that were creature comforts. They were here to strengthen the barrier between the Gentiles' old life and their life with Jesus. It's really cool that they were so thoughtful. They didn't just say, well, we should make them do some of our stuff. They said, if we get them to do these things, they're going to have a better relationship with Jesus. And this finally finishes off. So they went and they were set off and went down to Antioch. When they gathered the congregation together, they delivered the letter. And when the members read it, they rejoiced at the exhortation. Judas and Silas, who were there among them, or who themselves were prophets, said much to encourage and strengthen the believers as well. What happened? The Gentiles are thrilled that a compromise has been reached. They're really happy that the barrier between them and getting to know Jesus has been broken down. And then the church leaders, Silas and Judas, they stick around for a while. And they don't even just tell them, they don't just deliver the letter, but they build into their lives too. So 4 big things I want you to take away from this morning. 1, the church sent more than just Paul and Barnabas. Those guys that were assigned to the Gentiles, those whose job it was, they sent more than just them. They sent the rest of the church members too, because it was really important that the Gentiles understood that they were an important part of Christ's family and what was going on. In our context, what that can sometimes look like is, well, the children's ministry people take care of the kids, and so we don't have to do that. The youth ministry people take care of the youth, and we don't need to do that. Or the local outreach team takes care of local outreach, but we don't need to do that. That is not the attitude that the Jewish leaders and the church took. They said, we understand that it's important. And even though they're not our guys, we're going because we need them to know it's important. The church sent more than just a couple of people to deliver this message. 2, the church admitted their mistake. They had, whether they had intentionally or unintentionally made a mistake and misled the Gentiles into what they needed to believe, it happened. And they went, you know what? We're really sorry. They blew it. We blew it. It got blown, but we need to make steps. We need to take steps to make sure that it gets made right. And sometimes we have trouble as a church either admitting that we made a mistake, or sometimes it's just admitting that something that used to work doesn't work anymore. And that's not a mistake. That's just a course correction, right? That's saying this thing used to work, but now it's not effective, so maybe we need to make the adjustment. And their church did that. They said, we follow all these laws, but that's not going to work for you. So we're going to make sure that we make the adjustment, and we're going to make it right. Here's the third thing I want you to take away. I love this point so much. The church found a way to let go of its tradition, but hold on to integrity. Let me say that again. The church found a way to let go of tradition, but hold on to integrity. You think it was easy? Do you think it was easy for the Jewish church to let go all that tradition? The 613 laws and customs and rituals that they were used to be connected with God? Do you think it was easy for them to just look at the Gentiles and go, it's okay, we can just let this stuff go, it's not a big deal? I would imagine it was a huge, huge deal. But they found a way to let go of some of those traditions while holding on to the integrity of following Jesus. And we need to do that too. We need to find ways to reach emerging generations in our neighborhood and communities around us in a new way that is maybe a little bit outside our creature comforts and the things that we're used to, but hold on to the integrity of the message of Jesus Christ. And that's easier said than done. That's a big challenge, but that is one of those things that's, when we say what's next, that's one of those things that's next for church. And here's the fourth key point that I want you to take away from. Everything turned out okay, right? More than just the people that were assigned to the Gentiles went, and it turned out okay. They admitted that they made a mistake, and they tried to correct it, and they did correct it, and it turned out okay. And finally, they found a way to get rid of some of their tradition while holding on to the integrity of the message. And what happened? The Gentile church prospered. The Jewish church had new believers in the family, and everybody got closer to Jesus. It actually turned out okay. But it wouldn't have turned out okay if they didn't believe this. The message you're saying isn't true unless you actually follow through. Can you imagine if the Jerusalem Council story ended just at the boardroom table? It just ended with them saying, yep, they're important. Glad we decided that. Good job. But if they hadn't have taken the action of writing the letter and sending the letter, not just with Paul and Barnabas, but also with Silas and Judas. And not just that, but then saying, Judas and Silas, you guys can stick around and teach and encourage and build into that church for a while. It would have been empty. It wouldn't have mattered. They believed that the message you're sending isn't true unless you follow through, and so they followed through. They took the next step forward. So here's the question. How do we follow through? Well, if that wasn't enough to think about, I've got a couple of more things, just a couple of ideas of how we can follow through. If you're sitting at home and you're looking for something to read, this is a great resource. Go find the book Sticky Faith by Kara Powell and Chap Clark. Amazing, amazing stuff in there. Tons of great follow-through next steps. Here's a couple of things that I pulled out from it that might be helpful for us to think about. One, when we're thinking about intergenerational relationships, it's important to remember that despite an age segregation that exists both in our culture or in our churches, that each young person is greatly benefited when surrounded by a team of adults. In their case, what they call it is a 5-to-1 ratio. What they say is that it's much more likely for a student or a young adult to engage with their faith over a long term when they have 5 different adults that aren't their parents connected with them, building into their faith alongside their journey. Now, for us, this could mean different things in different contexts. This means that maybe in the children's ministry, we don't look at it and go, well, the children's ministry people have taken care of it. We allow them to run their Sunday school, but then we intentionally make sure we connect with those kids too and ask them how they're doing and engage with them with their faith. And when we think about outreach to our community, what this means is that we're actually not just getting the outreach committee or a handful of people to do it, but we all go. We all get connected with the community. We all show the community the same thing that the Jewish church showed the Gentiles, which is we're sending out more because we believe that you're important. That's something that's maybe worth considering as a next step. Second next step, we need to make sure we are teaching a whole gospel, right? I've seen this in my experience too. Many young people see faith as a jacket. They put it on when it's convenient. They take it off when it's convenient. And as leaders of the church and of people who are following Jesus, we need to make sure we're not doing that. One, we need to make sure we're not doing that for our own spiritual health in our faith, but we also need to make sure we're not doing that so that when we are showing other people the way to Jesus, that they can see that it's a part of our whole life and every aspect of our life. As an action step for us, this might be us just analyzing our own faith. What parts of our faith do we disengage in when it's convenient for us? Or what parts of the work of the church do we disengage with when it's convenient to us? Third is partnering with families. This is something that we can think about. Research demonstrates that parents are the number one influencers when it comes to spirituality in young people. This, of course, includes teenagers. As a youth pastor, I get about 40 hours a year on average with one of my students, but parents get about 3,000. So what we need to do as a church, whether this is in our programs that exist or within our community, is we need to make sure we are equipping people to grow on their own. We need to make sure we are equipping people to grow in their faith in the context that they are in. In our church community, that could mean making sure that we're better supporting parents. But when it comes to outreach, that could make sure that we're resourcing people with the things that they need that are actually helpful and effective for them. And we can talk about what some of those things are going to be a little bit later too. Four, the church needs to be a safe place for doubt. Faith doesn't die in doubt. Faith dies in silence. Young people want to have conversations about faith and about their doubts, but they don't just want answers. They want a conversation. They want a discussion. So if you're in a conversation with somebody about faith and they're starting to have doubts, when they ask you a question, here's what you do. Don't give them a direct answer right away. Ask them 3 or 4 questions back. Have that conversation. We need to offer tools and training for these types of discussions to you and to each other so that we can deepen faith with everybody involved, right? Here's the thing that I need you to remember if you forget all that. If you can only pull one thing out of this morning, here's the thing that I need you to pull out. The message you're sending isn't true unless you actually follow through. The message you're sending isn't true unless you actually follow through. And look, the Jewish church knew this. That's why they followed through. That's why the story didn't end with them sitting around a table saying, yup, that's important. It ended with action steps. It ended with them doing something. Because as a church, if we sit and we say emerging generations are really important, young people are really important, our community and reaching our community with the message of Jesus is really important, and then we leave the room and we don't do anything, and not just the 2 or 3 people, but as a collective we don't do anything, then we don't really actually believe it, do we? And that's really, really important for us to consider when we're considering reaching out to our community, especially now during a time when there's a lot of uncertainty and people are wondering what is going on in our world. The message we're sending isn't true unless we actually follow through. So we've talked about a whole lot of next steps that we can take towards reaching our community, towards building our own faith, and towards building relationships with younger generations today. We've talked about a whole bunch. So what I would challenge you is to just think about one. Go back, maybe rewatch it again. Think about one thing that you can do and then ask yourself this question. What's next? What's next for me in my faith? What's next for me when I reach out to my community? And what's next for Westside? Let me pray with you together. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn. Thank you for giving us the resources and the time and the space to reach out to young people and to our community. And God, I pray that you would give us the strength and the boldness and the wisdom that we need to do that, and that you would continue to nudge our hearts towards what's next. In Jesus' name, amen.
Are you thirsty? Are you empty? Come and drink these living waters. Tired and broken, peace unspoken, rest beside these living waters.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, Mark.
Thanks for leading worship with Westside this morning. Much appreciated. You've had, you're developing a long relationship with Westside. You've done workshops here last year, which I think we had a good turnout from congregational members. You've been working with the elders, the session, several times this year, and are continuing to be with us at our Zoom meetings. One of the things that the session has certainly become aware of, and you touched on this in the workshops, was the difference between mission and method. And I saw you developing those themes again in the sermon this morning. For the people tuning into the service today, can you expand on that? Why is that so critical, and why do you bring it up so often?
Well, thanks for asking. This is like my favorite thing to talk about, which of course you know. So, mission is the thing that we're supposed to accomplish, the thing that we're trying to do, right? And method is the way that we do it. And as a church, it's really important to understand the difference between those two things when making sort of any kind of decision. If you make a method decision first, often you're not following your mission, or you're not following the thing that you're trying to do as well. Sometimes when you make a mission decision first, it leads you to do something that you're a little more uncomfortable with, but almost always accomplishes the goal at hand, right? So I like to use the analogy of my hands, which is you can't hold on to both tightly. If you hold on to mission tightly, you have to leave your hand open for method, because that means that whatever if this is your mission and you hold on to it tightly, you're willing to accomplish the mission however it needs to be accomplished. You're willing to change, you're willing to adjust. If you hold on to your methods tightly, this is how it has to happen, then your mission hand is actually open. You care less about what you accomplish, you just care more about how it gets done. This is how we do it, right? And this is important. The sermon this morning sort of talks about how Paul and Barnabas went back to the Gentiles and tried to reach this new community of believers that was culturally different, that wasn't the same as what the traditions that the Jewish people had held. It was different than what they were used to. But they knew the mission was to get the message of Jesus out. And so the Jewish church was willing to make some concessions on their methods while holding on to their integrity, which was really important, obviously, to do so. And when we've talked in our workshops and in session meetings, I think we've started to struggle with that conversation a lot too, right? What's the difference, and how do you make a mission decision first before you just fall into the method one? And that's really important when we think about reaching the community in and around Westside, because if you approach it from a method area first and you say, well, this is how we're going to do it, and whoever we reach is who we're going to reach, then you're really going to limit yourself. But if you say the mission of Westside is to reach out to our community with the message of Christ, then you're willing to find new and different ways to do that. And that's how those things are connected. In the sermon this morning, they did that too, right? Mm-hmm. They said, we would really like to reach the Gentiles with the message of Jesus, but we understand that requires us to do something new and something different. And there were clearly some people at that council around that I don't know if you want to call it a boardroom table or whatever that table looked like. There were people around that table that weren't super comfortable with that, but they understood the mission at hand and were willing to sort of make those adjustments, right? And so as churches in our local communities, it's really important that we take that mission focus first, because as long as we're mission focused, we make sure our methods are always going to match the mission as opposed to the other way around. Now that I've said those two words a million times in a row, right? But yeah, you know me, I love talking about this stuff, so that's really great. Yeah.
There was one theme that you developed in the sermon that I was particularly taken with, as you said, who they sent back.
Yeah.
It wasn't just. Can you expand on that? Because you've made it clear both in the workshops and with the elders that our elders that you've been working with, that it's not one person's job or one committee's job.
That's right. Yeah, I thought that was a great thing to pull out of this example too, was that Paul and Barnabas were the guys that were called to the Gentiles. But after all this was over, the Jewish church really wanted them to know that they were serious. So they didn't just send back those guys, they sent everybody else back too. Right? You don't just send the youth pastor to the youth. What really makes an impact is when volunteers come and when people from different generations come and they all get together and they get to see the body. And so from an outreach perspective, if you're looking at your community, it's really important to say like, okay, these 4 people aren't our outreach people, and everybody else gets to kind of hang back and says, oh, those are the people that are reaching the community.
Yeah.
If you want to reach your community as a church, the whole church needs to buy in, right? And that's what they did. They sent a couple of guys who were really important to the church, and they sent them too, and they said, look at how much we value you. We're not just sending your people back, but we're all going to come along. And so when Westside thinks about reaching out to their community, it's really important that it's not just a session member or just a small group of volunteers that love this stuff, but we all need to find a way as a church to reach out to that community together, right? So that we can not only be more effective, but we can show the community, you matter to all of us, right? Yeah. And that, I think, makes a big difference when we're talking about all this, right? So, yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you for being with us this morning. I can tell you your work with the presbytery has made a significant impact on me and my ministry here. I know it's helping the session. The elders share that with me all the time. So cool. I'm looking forward when we can do this all together and we can bring the congregation back for another workshop sometime this year or that.
Yeah, so, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here at Westside this morning. Mark will be back next week, and I'm sure he'll be really excited to see you then. Stick around after if you need to know how to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and ask yourself this question this week: what's next? What's the next step for you? Thanks so much for having me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
If you'd like to receive an email notification each time Westside uploads a new video to the YouTube channel, you can make that change in your subscriber settings. I'll show you how.
Go to youtube.com. Make sure you're signed in to your YouTube or Google account. Search for Westside Presbyterian Church, Cambridge. When you see the photo of Westside, click on it to get to our YouTube channel homepage. Click subscribe, then click the bell icon and change your setting from personalized to all to make sure you get an email for each new video.
Good morning. For the past few weeks, I've enjoyed the hymn sing that the Getty family has put up on the internet on Tuesday evenings. They're Keith and Kristen Getty, Getty, with their little girls, have a family time of singing, and they share it with us. It's in order to participate, which they would encourage. If you go to Facebook, if you're on Facebook, go to Facebook and search their last name, Getty. You will find their page. All you have to do is like it. That's click on the little fist with a thumb in the air, and you will receive notifications. If you go to their page, you will see their most recent hymn sing, which was Tuesday, the 28th of April. And either just above or just below, you will see a link where you can click and get a copy of their booklet. So this particular week, the Hymn Sing booklet was lyrics. The little letters above are just guitar chords, so just disregard that, just follow the lyrics. In previous weeks, they've been more generous and given actual sheet music to go along for those of you who read music. If you're not on Facebook, you can also find them on YouTube the same way. Just put their name in, and probably along with their hymn sings, you will find a lot of their other recordings as well. So hopefully this will brighten your day.